Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to another little 80s throwback here. So before I begin, if you are new here, I like to make these videos about the things that I enjoy and want to share, usually about film, and a lot of times I put in some throwbacks for stuff from the 80s that I don't hear as much about anymore, or just some other titles. Just depends on what I'm in the mood for. And if you like what you see here, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing and hitting that bell icon to get notifications for when I put up new content, which is once or twice a week. Though lately I am trying to work in a little bit more. Be sure to stick around to the end and share both this channel and video around, as it really does help out quite a bit. Okay, now that all that's out of the way, for this next entry for this film, actually for two films, I don't really hear that much about. So anyways, the first one here is Romancing the Stone from 1984, starring Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, and Danny DeVito, as well as a sequel that came out just 1 year later, Jewel of the Nile, starring all three of them as well. So for those unfamiliar with these two titles, let's start with Romancing the Stone, the synopsis being as follows. A mousy romance novelist sets off for Colombia to ransom her kidnapped sister, and soon finds herself in the middle of a dangerous adventure hunting for treasure with a mercenary rogue. Well, that sounds a bit more serious than it actually is, because this is a comedy, has a lot of comedy aspects at least thrown into it, which makes it a lot of fun. And of course, this, mousy romance novelist is played by Kathleen Turner, and the mercenary rogue is played by Michael Douglas, while of course Danny DeVito is playing one of those kidnappers. So there are other characters at play here, outside of the kidnappers. So of course, what eventually happens is that, our lead arrives, she arrives in Colombia, and things go sideways pretty quickly. The result of this is our mercenary kind of coming to rescue her, and then offering to help her to get to Cartagena, for a fee, of course. He is a mercenary after all, and, he's been spending a lot of time in Central America trying to find work where he can, new ventures that can kind of help him out, and to save up enough money to follow his dreams, so to say, such as buying a sailboat and venturing around the world. So throughout their misadventures, Danny DeVito's character is kind of keeping tabs on them, because this ransom has to do with a treasure map, which is ultimately what the kidnappers want, while our mercenary and our mousy writer begin to have the idea that maybe they can get that treasure themselves, and then hand over that requested map, get the sister back, and reap the rewards of having found all that treasure, and having pulled a fast one on those kidnappers. But there is, as I said, this comedy aspect to it. There's a lot of it sprinkled throughout. It's never too much to distract from the seriousness of anything that's happening, any of the danger within these situations in this adventure. And on top of that, the title says Romancing the Stone. We have a romance brewing between, our writer and our mercenary, which feels very honest and not forced. It happens very gradually throughout this story. So when we come to our conclusion, of course, and everything works out for the best, and we have a nice, happy little romantic ending to it, everything's wrapped up really nice. Now, I watched this for the first time in a better part of a decade, not that long ago. I purchased it on Blu-ray, actually. A very cheap set that had both movies, this one and Jewel of the Nile, and the transfer was absolutely amazing. I could see detail that I never noticed before, even like bloopers, where I was able to see where one of the characters like smacks up against this rock. When he swings into it, you could see the rock could give a little, because the transfer was that clear. Now, of course, I may be putting this transfer on too high of a pedestal, because most of my previous viewings of both of these films were on VHS copies made like off of Cinemax, showing them late at night. Pan and scan, low res, likely, with a, the economical way that we used to record things back then in EP/SLP mode. For you youngsters, that's basically like watching something in 360p on YouTube. You get the content, but it's really crappy quality. But yeah, so, we used to fit 3 of these movies onto VHS, so we'd have 2 of these on there. The transfer was crap, but they were still fun to watch. So now with this Blu-ray, it looks astoundingly better by comparison. But honestly, even when I look at some other, films that are put onto Blu-ray, they really did do a good job with this transfer. So, as for the follow-up, which came out just a year later, they brought back everybody pretty much. We had Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, and Danny DeVito. So the synopsis, which first let's keep in mind the names of the characters. Joan is our, mousy writer. Jack is a mercenary, and Danny DeVito plays one of the kidnappers named Ralph. Anyways, the synopsis for the sequel to it is: when Joan Wilder is abducted while on a trip along the Nile, her boyfriend, Jack Colton, and pal Ralph rush to rescue her and retrieve the fabled jewel. So yeah, Danny DeVito is, playing Ralph, and he gets kind of roped into this whole thing as well. So we have a different director this time. Zemeckis did the original, and we had different writers for this one as well, with only Diane Thomas being credited as that this is based on characters that she had written. But Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, easily drop right back into these roles again, as does Danny DeVito, and they throw in a few things to kind of mix up who Danny DeVito's character is in a way, to really give him this sense that he has changed from the end of one movie to the next. But we get this nice opening for our writer, Joan Wilder, trying to figure out a story that she's been working on for a while. She's falling behind on her deadline, and she's given this opportunity to write a nonfiction piece about a ruler of this other country, which this whole situation ends up turning into a kidnapping. They're after the Jewel of the Nile, which, spoiler alert on this, the Jewel is actually a religious leader. So I always remembered this one as not being as good as Romancing the Stone, but still being enjoyable. And after all these years, getting to check it out again, I still kind of hold that opinion. I think the issue really was that although we have the same comedy and action adventure thrown into this one, we missed that romance aspect. These characters getting to know each other was a big part of the first film for me. Along with that, we are in a desert, which, instead of a jungle, which isn't as appealing to look at. It's not as green, it's not as interesting of terrain. And it's just sand everywhere. I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating. And it gets everywhere, to quote Anakin. Anyways, but I think the biggest turnoff was the politics. So instead of an action-adventure romance, we get these characters caught up in a political situation that overall was not as interesting. Now, it is worth checking out, and especially watching these two films pretty close together, we get to see how the characters kind of progress from one film to another. And though the second one isn't as good as the first one, it is, Jewel of the Nile is still worth checking out. I really wish they would have made a third of these, actually, to kind of make a nice little trilogy out of it. But, this... I really like the fact that we used to get a lot of these 80s action kind of films that would sometimes sprinkle in some comedy or some romance. And the thing is, if you have seen these and you've enjoyed them, let me make another quick recommendation here for a 2022 film called The Lost City, which starred Channing Tatum, Sandra Bullock, and Daniel Radcliffe of Harry Potter fame. There are some similarities here, in that there's an adventure, there's a writer, and, but what it really boils down to is that action-adventure sided with comedy. I haven't seen it executed as well as they did in Lost City, and it really reminded me of Romancing the Stone, which is why I decided to do the little recommendation on Romancing the Stone and to throw in Jewel of the Nile as well. But, although in The Lost City the romance kind of takes a back seat, by comparison, it does lead us into comedy and, much more, and pulls it off as a very fun ride. Anyways, all three of these are worth checking out. Definitely check out Romancing the Stone. I don't think it's available on any streaming platforms for free. Believe it's got a very small price to rent them. Same thing with Jewel of the Nile, but then again, this Blu-ray I think was only like $12. So go ahead and check it out. And same thing with checking out Lost City, which I believe is on Paramount Plus. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this little dual recommendation of mine for Jewel of the Nile and Romancing the Stone, and throwing in that third for Lost City. And I will see you in the next one.